Welcome, everyone, to Orange Audubon's September program, Coexisting with Panthers Update by Dr. Jennifer Korn. And I'm Deborah Green, Orange Audubon President. And just by way of a few announcements, next week we're back to the bird chat format on Zoom, Thursday, September 23rd, 7 p.m., monitoring birds in the Amazon. And for the Zoom programs, you have to sign up in advance on the Orange Audubon Society website to be sent the Zoom link. And once registering, you'll get the Zoom link every week. And on that website, you'll see our brochure is downloadable and you can follow our events. And as she presents, please write your questions for Dr. Korn in the chat on YouTube or Facebook Live. And I will start by introducing and thanking you very much, Dr. Korn, for presenting for us. We had you present back in October 2018, and it was just great, and we're eager to hear an update. All of you out there, Dr. Korn is a wildlife biologist, and she's been working on panthers for approximately 8 years here in Florida. She worked for FWC and now works for Johnson Engineering. And with that, I'll let her explain what she is doing.
All right. So thank you so much for having me. I hope that you can hear me well. Pipe up and put a little comment in there if you can't for any reason, and I'll talk louder. I'm very good at that. So thank you for having me back. So if you watched that previous one, some of this might look familiar, but there's some new information in there as well. So I'm going to talk about panthers in general, but also kind of focus on what's going on north of the Caloosahatchee River, which is where I live and where I do a lot of my, the focusing of my research and monitoring, even though I get to go down and play down south as well. So just a little bit of my background. I'm from Texas originally. I grew up there. It's where I did all my schooling. I did my PhD in Kingsville, Texas, where I worked on ocelots, and that's those cats on the left. They're small, about bobcat size, and they're federally endangered, and they have a lot of the same conservation issues that panthers have, which is one of the really great gateways that gave me the chance to move to Florida in 2013 and work with FWC as their first Florida panther biologist north of the Caloosahatchee River. So all of the rest of the panther biologists, which is an awesome team of guys that are down in Naples. So that was the first time they'd had one covering up north. And, like I said, it has a lot of the same issues, conservation issues as panthers. So where you're talking about low genetic diversity, private lands are really important, and, habitat loss, that sort of thing. And since then, in 2017, I left FWC and went to a private company, Johnson Engineering, where I've continued to do a lot of the same panther work, which is monitoring cameras and looking at wildlife crossings, as well as lots of other things I get to do as well, since I do have a PhD in wildlife. So I get to do gopher tortoises and caracara and other stuff as well. But my focus has always been big cats. That's my specialty. So we're talking about the Florida panther. Well, Florida panther is basically just a mountain lion, puma, cougar. All of those names apply. They are just called panthers when you're talking about the subspecies that occurs in the Southeast. And there is some debate about whether or not that genetic classification might change in the future. Right now, there are still considered different subspecies in North America. The one in the Northeast is actually considered extinct. And then the one you see in the yellow and the blue there, that's the Southeast. That's Puma concolor corii that we call the Florida panther. And that blue is their historical range. So they used to range across the entire Southeast. But now they're basically stuck down in that red area. And that's mostly south of the Caloosahatchee. We'll talk about how that's changed a teeny bit. But for the most part, most panthers and most breeding is occurring down there in that red area. Now, in the 80s or so, 1980s or so, they realized, wow, there weren't a whole lot of panthers in Florida, maybe 20 or 30 different panthers. And they were suffering from really severe inbreeding depression, had a lot of really severe health issues that went along with that. So in 1995, they released 8 female Texas panthers, basically the same mountain lion, puma, cougar, whatever you want to call them, in 1995. 5 of those females bred with panther males and produced at least 20 kittens that they know of. In 2003, they removed the remaining female panthers that were still alive just to, they put them in captivity or something like that, so that they had gotten as much genetic, that they'd gotten out as much genetics into the population as they were wanting. And the traits associated with inbreeding have almost disappeared at this point. There were holes in the heart, kinked tails. Whoop, go back. And we still see a few of those things every now and then, but the most severe ones we don't. And the numbers have gone way up. Right now, the current population is somewhere around 120 to 230. So somewhere around 200 panthers. So it's quite an increase from the 20 or so that they knew were there in the 1980s. So even though we're up to about 200, most of them are still found south of Lake Okeechobee and the Coexisting River. So the Coexisting River runs from Lake Okeechobee down to the Gulf of Mexico. And that map you're looking at right there is showing all of the VHF collar locations over a really long period of time, from like the 1980s to whenever I made this map a couple of years ago. And all those blue ones are males and all those pink dots are females. And it's multiple locations per individual. And those little red triangles are mortalities. And I'm just showing the mortalities north of the river. But if you've kind of have a keen eye, you've noticed that the only points that are north of the river are blue. And all of those little red triangles were all males. So even though we have been getting males crossing the river for many years and getting into other areas of Florida, there was actually a roadkill in southern Georgia in 2006 or 7. It's been quite a while. Not a roadkill, I'm sorry. A panther got to southern Georgia and was shot illegally by a hunter. So we know that they can make these distances, but at that point it had just been males, except for the last female that they had seen north of the river in the 1970s, until that changed in November 2016. And this was really groundbreaking event. So, and actually the first pictures were actually from 2015, but I got pictures on some game cameras that I had at Babcock Ranch. And I sent those to the rest of the panther guys down in Naples. And I said, this just doesn't seem like a male. It seems like, and it's not this particular picture, it was a different one. It just kind of seems like that's kind of like the body shaped like a female, but, unless they turn around and kind of perfectly position themselves in front of the camera, you can't always be 100% certain. So we added more cameras, another biologist came up and we put more cameras out, and it still took another year or so before we got more pictures, as well as a track. And in that cast right there is a female panther track. It's very hard to see. But along with the picture and that track, we were able to say for certain that there was a female north of the Coexisting River since the early 1970s. So this was really fantastic news. It showed that they were recolonizing their previous territory on their own. And, it's not that females can't swim. It's not that they can't move those distances. It's just that usually females like to set up a home range kind of overlapping their mother, wherever they were born, their philopatric. And males usually are the ones that make these really long treks to find their own territory. But finally, a female had decided to see what was up there. Now, if you're not familiar with where Babcock Ranch is and its history, it's a little bit northeast of Fort Myers, and it is on the north side of the Coexisting River. And it's a really interesting story because a developer actually bought that entire yellow area and then sold, the yellow and the red, and then sold back the yellow to the state to be put into conservation. And there were a lot of different groups that for many years had been trying to get that area protected. So it wasn't just, that particular one. There was lots of other organizations and groups involved. And then it finally occurred because of that situation. And just on that red area, which is, less than 14,000 acres, whereas that yellow is 70-something thousand acres. A new neighborhood is being built called Babcock Ranch Community. It's entirely solar powered. Almost 100% of it's being built on old sod fields or mine lands. Very little native habitat was used. So it's just an example of, because development's going to happen in Florida. And about 900 people move here every day. And if we can do it smartly, then you can have situations similar to this, where we've got this huge area now in Babcock Ranch Preserve that's protected. And we know that males would have occasionally traveled through there. And then that was actually where we got the first picture of the female panther. Now, like I said, I've been getting pictures in that area for a long time. I put cameras out in 2013 at Babcock Ranch, as well as a bunch of other locations and across 14 counties. And I've been getting this male in this picture right here, passing through that area for a while. So if you think about this video. So that's him. He hissed at a frog. So he's scared of frogs, apparently. I'm joking, actually. I mean, he was obviously just startled by the sound, but I love that video where he hisses at the frog. But I knew that male had been around that area when we got the pictures of the female. So if you kind of put two and two together, so this is the female right here in the video. If you listen closely, and there he is. And sure enough, so that was in November, close to the end of the year when we first got the pictures of her. And the following March, so March of 2017, we got pictures of her with at least 2 kittens. And so now this was even, just mind-blowing to all of us. We finally had a female that had crossed the river again, and then she'd had kittens. So the first breeding north of the river, probably even longer period of time. So this is still her from March with, there's 1 kitten, 2nd kitten. Well, shortly after these pictures were taken, then it was kind of radio silence for a while. We'd go out and check the cameras, and there would be pictures of things, maybe the male, but there no sign of the female. And we had quite a few cameras out there, but still, it's a very large area to cover. So maybe we just were missing her. But then what happened in September of 2017, I'm sure y'all remember, Hurricane Irma went right across that area. Now, obviously, the animals in Florida are adapted to live with things like wildfire, hurricanes. So, we anthropomorphize a little bit by thinking about, oh gosh, what are these animals doing during all this? I don't know what you guys did, but I went probably 8 days without power here in Lake Placid and had $30,000 worth of damage on my house. So I was thinking this whole time, actually, what happened to these cameras? What happened to these animals? And in November of 2017, I went out, just happened to be out checking cameras out on Babcock Ranch. And sure enough, got a picture of her. And she'd had 2 more kittens. So she probably lost the first litter, which it happens. She probably was a first-time mom. They get better as they go. Kitten survival is about 33% normally. So it wasn't a huge surprise that had happened, even though it stinks to think about. But she had another litter, and doing the rough math on that, that litter would have been very small, still in the den about the time that Irma went right over the top of that ranch. So she was obviously a very, very good mom. Then even more exciting. So we've already had our first female north of the river. And then right about the time that I had left FWC to go and work for Johnson Engineering, I get a call from a previous colleague at FWC that he'd gotten some pictures on his cameras at Platte Branch. Now, this picture right here is from June, but he actually called me in March with some different pictures and said, you know what, I just think these pictures don't look like a male. And I drove down there that day, and we found tracks and took casts. And sure enough, it was a different female panther. So that makes number 2 that had made it across the river. So Platte Branch is where the pictures were taken, which is in Highlands County, but it's right at the Highlands and Glades line. So that female was likely using both of those areas. Now, she actually had multiple males to choose from at the time. We knew that there was at least this one male going through there, just based on the pictures and videos that we get on the cameras. There was also this guy. This is also a Platte branch. And he's leaving what's called a scrape. And both males and females will do that. It's to mark their territory as well as to advertise to maybe male or female around. And unfortunately, that particular male, which you notice, is a little on the hefty side. That's not the normal size for a panther, for a wild panther. He was never captured, so we have no idea what was going on. We suspect he had some kind of health issue that might have caused him to get such a large belly like that, but obviously not enough that affected his overall health, because we recorded pictures and videos of him for many, many years in that area. So she had at least those two males to choose from, that second female. And sure enough, and we can't know for certain that this is her, but a couple of years later, a hunter got pictures of this female and these two kittens in Glades County, not far from where that second female had been seen. And it's an unverified photo, just meaning that it was submitted to FWC, but no one ever actually went out to make sure that it was actually correct. But we don't suspect there's any reason why it wouldn't be. So most likely that is that second female who had at least one litter of two kittens. And what happened to them after that, we can't be sure. But still just very exciting, but also just important information to know that at least these two females that had made it across the river had also managed to have kittens. Now, like I said, panthers are mostly still south of the Coexisting River. But for many years, many years, we've always known that males have crossed the river and gotten around places in the other parts of the state, still mostly between I-4 and the Coexisting, and then just rarely getting across I-4. I don't know, hopefully y'all can see this better. I didn't realize those are going to be kind of small, and I think you can probably see my pointer, but the little blue dots are all the VHF collar locations from the few males that they had collared south of the river that had actually crossed up and gone north. And then all the little red circles are roadkills, and the green plus signs are verified sightings. So that means that it, someone submitted the picture to the FWC Panther sightings website and it was verified. Maybe it came from a camera that I had out. Basically it was verified in some way. So you can kind of see that along the middle there, along US 27, along the Lake Wells Ridge, is a really great travel corridor. And the ridge is a great travel corridor for lots of wildlife, but also along riparian areas like the Peace River, Kissimmee River. Those are all great wildlife corridors, especially for these large, wide-ranging animals like panther. And then you can see occasionally they do get across I-4. Here's a couple up kind of near Green Swamp. That's Green Swamp. And then up kind of closer to where some of you guys are at, there's been a couple roadkills. Here's one way up, getting closer to Jacksonville. So just to give you an idea of where we typically see them when they actually get across the river. And then where all those ones I was talking about down here, Babcock Ranch is here. And then along here, Highlands and Glades are another really great corridor. So just kind of give you an example. Here's just a few pictures of some verified sightings. So this is a photo that Carlton Ward got at a private ranch. And obviously this was many years ago, but nice picture of a male on a private ranch in Highlands County, which was roughly kind of that area in that box there. Here's our friend from Platte Branch that I mentioned before that doesn't have the normal shape of a panther. And if you see down here where it says that it was taken at, that's Kissimmee Prairie State Park, Kissimmee Prairie Preserve State Park, which is up in Okeechobee County. And it's about 40 miles or so from Platte Branch as the crow flies. Now, an average home range for a male panther is about 200 square miles. And panthers can travel on average about 10 miles in a night. So 40 miles between those two areas is not a huge surprise, other than just kind of imagining this kind of larger sized fellow making that trek lots of times. And he did. I had multiple photos of him at Kissimmee Prairie and then back down in Highlands County. So he's obviously making the trek back and forth. It was just part of his home range. There's Kissimmee Prairie State Park, and that's the Avon Park bombing range right there. Here's an average sized guy that we would typically see for a male, somewhere around 135 pounds maybe, which was over on some county land in Manatee County. which is roughly around there. But you'd be surprised at how many people still get confused identifying whether or not they saw a panther. And I think sometimes it's just because people get excited. They want to see a panther. We have 2 native wildcats in Florida, so the panther and then the bobcat. And the bobcat is much smaller, and they're spotted even as adults, and that spot pattern can vary a lot. So sometimes the spots can be so mottled that from far away they just kind of look tan. But the big key things that you're looking for is the tail. So a bobcat's tail can be somewhere between 6 or 8 inches even, but never as long as the body. And a panther's tail is going to be about the length of their body. And then panthers are not spotted as adults. They're spotted as kittens, but they lose those spots as adults, and then they're shades of tan. And then the backs of the ears. So the back of a panther's ear are going to be dark, and the back of a bobcat's ears are going to be white. Just a few other kind of basic kind of natural history things about panthers. So I've already mentioned the weight a couple of times. So females are typically somewhere around 85 pounds, and a male typically is going to be around 135. The largest that I know of, and this might be different since I have not worked at FWC again, but on a panther capture a few years ago, we caught a male that weighed in at like 159. He had just eaten that morning, had a belly full of wild pig. So he might have actually weighed more like 150, but that's typically the top that you'll see. And that's partly because of this biological rule called Bergman's rule, where animals at the southern part of their range tend to be lighter and longer limbed, and animals at the northern part of their range tend to be bigger bodied, shorter limbed. If you think about it, if you are a mountain lion that lives in Canada or the Rockies or something, it's good to be big bodied and short limbed, because that blood has to get all the way to the bottom of your extremities when it's cold. And if you're long limbed, it's a longer way to go. Plus your prey is a lot bigger, things like moose and elk. But then in Florida, the southern part of the range, it doesn't benefit you to be really large bodied like that because it's hot. It's hard to dissipate heat. So if you're smaller bodied and longer limbed, it's easier to keep cool. And also your prey is smaller too, because they're following the same rules. So the deer in Florida, I'm sure you're familiar, are kind of like little rat-sized deer. So, and I'm joking, but they are much smaller than their northern counterparts. So lifespan, males don't live as long. You know, they're lucky if they make it to 10 years in the wild, because they are traveling more, crossing greater distances, and also potentially fighting with other males. Their home ranges are somewhere around 200 square miles or so, which is the size of 96,000 football fields. So it's quite a large area. Females, a much smaller home range, somewhere around 80, 85 square miles. And the two main causes of mortality in Florida are intraspecific aggression, which is just a fancy way to say that they'll fight each other. Typically, males will fight other males for territory. Occasionally, a male might kill another female because they're trying to maybe kill her kittens to bring her into estrus and she got in the way. But that happens much less often. But the number one cause of mortality are road kills, with them getting hit on roads. And there's a lot of things that the state and all sorts of other organizations are working on to try to mitigate those road kills. And I'm going to talk about that in some later slides. So the nice thing about Florida, we don't really have true seasons, so they can breed year round. We see a little bit of a peak in the spring, but we have seen kittens in every month of the year. And they really like this dense palmetto thicket habitat. So it's one of the things that we try to, when we work with landowners, is so that they create a mosaic of habitats on their ranches, so that there's still some areas that are really thick. They can have somewhere between 1 and 4 kittens, but typically we see like 2 or 3 is the norm. And because those kittens stay with her usually between 9 and a year and a half, 9 months and a year and a half, she's not going to have a litter typically except for every 2 years. I mentioned before that as adults, they lose their spots and then they are just shades of tan. They cannot be black. And I think sometimes people get confused because we call them panthers here. And sometimes when other large cats have that black phase or melanistic phase, they get called panthers. So jaguars, like the picture on the bottom left, and leopard on the bottom right, sometimes when they are melanistic like that, they're called panthers. They're still a jaguar or a leopard, and they actually still have their spots. But geneticists have actually found that the gene that causes spotting in cats is genetically linked to the gene that causes that black phase, that melanism. So cats that aren't spotted, like a puma, genetically just cannot be black. And like I said, sometimes I think people get confused because of the wording, but then also, if they're in the shade or it's sunrise or sunset or they're dirty or they're wet, it can look darker. But nowhere has anyone ever recorded a black phase puma anywhere across their entire geographic range from Canada to Argentina, anywhere in the time that cameras have existed. So I won't tell you it's 100% impossible, because I guess you can't ever say that, but I'd say it's pretty good evidence since it's never been recorded, although we see it in multiple species of spotted cats, including the other cat that is native to Florida, which are bobcats. So bobcats are a spotted cat, and they can occasionally have this melanistic phase. I know of at least 3 in Florida that have been confirmed. A couple were pictures. And then obviously this one was a roadkill in Sebring, Florida a few years ago, and FWC collected it and actually had it made into a taxidermy mount so that they could use it for education. And you can see, if you look closely, still has his spots. They're just, kind of harder to see. And I actually don't know of anywhere else in the US that has a confirmed black phase bobcat. It doesn't mean that it's not possible, but I just don't know of it offhand. So I think it's kind of neat that it is apparently a gene that's in the Florida population, at least at some low level. Now, panthers are generalists, so they'll eat pretty much anything, but they do prefer prey that is worth the trouble. So deer or wild pigs, which it's great that they eat pigs because we know that they're invasive and they cause all sorts of damage to crops and things. So they're doing their part to help get rid of that invasive species. But they'll eat armadillos and rabbits and raccoons. They will occasionally eat domestic animals. So if you live somewhere like Golden Gate Estates, down outside of Naples, where you're living in a very remote area with a lot of native habitat, it's good to make sure that your pets are secured at night and your hobby livestock. But the good thing to know is that just because they're around, just because they're present, doesn't constitute a threat. Also, preying on domestic animals doesn't lead to preying on humans. So if they were to take someone's hobby livestock, like a goat, it's not the gateway to eating humans. And we've never had a confirmed attack on a human in Florida. Now, obviously, you've probably heard of attacks that have happened out west. So California, Colorado have had a few. The numbers are still really low. It may seem like more just because we're in the age of technology where these kind of things just come out really fast. But statistically, you're more likely to die from a coconut falling on your head than from a mountain lion attack. But there are places in Florida where you can have a little more luck potentially seeing one. And that's where some of these pictures are from. The one on the boardwalk, I believe, is from Corkscrew. The one at the bird bath is somebody's house in Golden Gate Estates. And then the one where it's standing outside the porta potty, which just cracks me up. I just imagine somebody coming out of the porta potty and seeing this cat standing there. I think was also somewhere down near Corkscrew, so somewhere outside of Naples. The good thing is for things like pets or hobby livestock, there are simple ways to be able to keep that from happening, and that's using enclosures. So bring your pets in at night, and this doesn't apply to just panthers. It applies to any kind of wildlife occurring in Florida. So bears, raccoons, bobcats, snakes, whatever might be potentially harmful to your pets or hobby livestock. You can bring them in at night, or if they're hobby livestock, you can put them in an enclosure that has a roof. And it's been proven to be very, very successful. If you have a good sturdy enclosure, you see this picture on the left there is actually from somewhere in Golden Gate Estates, where they had put up an enclosure and the panther could no longer get in there. There are organizations that help landowners do this. Defenders of Wildlife has a program where they help homeowners or landowners, whatever, to build enclosures. They sometimes can have a partial grant depending on where the person is located to help build it. And even if you don't do that, they'll still come help you build it. And they're trying to expand that into other areas of the state as well. And then obviously that doesn't work for large livestock out on, ranches. And that does occasionally occur, but so far we haven't seen any kind of indication that panthers that do occasionally take a calf then only do that from then on. They do switch back to their native prey. And we know that it works. This is a video from somewhere in North Florida that someone submitted to FWC a few years ago. That's a bobcat trying to get into somebody's chicken coop. It doesn't have any sound, unfortunately, because the chickens are probably going crazy. And again, I don't know the full story. The people had shared it with FWC. I suspect they were having issues losing chickens and were advised to get some kind of enclosure. They did. And from then on, the bobcat can no longer get in there and get the chickens. We're kind of switching gears a little bit and talking a little bit about what are some of I mentioned earlier that roadkill was the #1 cause of mortality. So what are some of the things that I say we, and I mean state agencies, so FWC, FDOT, nonprofit organizations, private companies, all sorts of groups are involved in this. And one of the best ways to do that, to mitigate for that, is with wildlife crossings. And if you've ever driven on Alligator Alley, you're probably familiar with all those crossings that they put on Alligator Alley. And that's all these little yellow ones down here. Lots of them on 29 as well. Some other ones kind of dotted around here. We've even got some up on State Road 60. And a lot of these are the really nice, like bridge span ones where it's really tall and wide underneath, and lots of things will use it. So panthers, bears, deer, and we know that they work. So these little kind of orangey stars are places that that FDOT is already planning to put in some new crossings. So they're already either under construction or for sure planned. And then a couple of these ones up on I-4 are potential. And I think this one right here is a done deal finally. There's a fantastic individual that works at FDOT District 1, which covers this whole area, that has been really focused on getting more wildlife crossings, especially on I-4, where you can see there's been a few roadkills. That's a roadkill. This one's a roadkill. Actually, it's on this little connector here. And then up here. And I-4, if you've ever been on I-4, you know that it's a tough thing to get across if you're an animal. And I'll have some more examples of that here in a few slides when we talk about a certain bear. And not only are wildlife crossings important, but also wildlife corridors. And I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about that, but if you're familiar with the Florida Wildlife Corridor expeditions and Carlton Ward and Mallory and Joe and the things that they have done, that's about connecting all these protected areas. Those little green patches are all protected lands. And that's working on getting these areas connected so that there are corridors for wildlife to be able to travel through. And then this one right here is a really neat one. So like I said, these ones down here in the alley, very expensive because they're big concrete bridge spans that, I asked a few years ago, one of the guys at FDOT, what does it potentially cost to build a wildlife crossing like that from scratch? And you're talking about at least $4 million, if not more. But some of the things that FDOT has started doing, and it's not new to Florida, they've done it in other states too, but they've been really successful with in Florida, has been retrofitting some of these areas. So this one right here on State Road 80 to the east of LaBelle, it was always an area where the C1 canal went under State Road 80. But a few years ago, they went in and retrofit it to where they added shelves on the sides so that there was a ledge for animals to walk, and then some fencing, like you see on Alligator Alley, that runs about 1 kilometer each direction, basically funneling animals in. And then on top of that, the property just to the north of the road but south of the river went under conservation easement. The property to the south of the road went under conservation easement. And then just a year and a half or so ago, the property just to the north of the river here went under conservation easement. So now we have this whole entire area protected under easement, so it'll never be developed. So we've created a wildlife corridor and then also this wildlife crossing there. I won't go into a ton of detail on this, but just wanted to kind of show some of the things that I was involved in, and with Johnson Engineering, we've contracted with FDOT to look at. So we know, obviously, these crossings down here are probably going to be very successful. But no one had really done a lot of camera monitoring on these ones that head farther east where there's some more water. So I put cameras on all those, as well as really focused on a bunch of these bridges. That is hard. I'm sorry, these aren't bigger. I'll make sure I make these bigger on the next map. But the little kind of turquoise stars are all places where there was already a bridge. So it wasn't built to be a wildlife crossing. It's just a bridge that was already on that road because maybe there's a creek or a canal or something underneath. But when you go walk underneath some of these, they already basically kind of look like wildlife crossings underneath. And sometimes they even have enough dry land on the side that animals can walk. And really the only difference is there's not necessarily anything funneling them in. So there's no fencing or anything on the road, so the animals could still go across the road. But so I just did a study with them where we put cameras on all of these locations, basically 56 different locations, to monitor what species were using them, and then what were the design details about those bridges, and did some statistical analyses, basically try to tease out what were some of these design features that certain species preferred. So, you know, panthers and bears being important, but also white-tailed deer, because they're an important prey item for panthers. And deer are very strange about what kinds of crossings that they'll walk through because they're a prey animal, right? So they don't like really low, dark, long things to walk through. They like really tall, open, lots of light so that they can see if there's a predator around. So trying to figure out maybe what was the smallest that you could get where a deer would still use it to save money in construction, but also some other features as well. And I got over 100,000 photos and videos, some of which you can actually see on FDOT's website. I'll share in just a minute. So they posted this really neat video a couple of years ago. And this is just a bunch of footage that FDOT put together from some of these locations. So these ones that say JEI, those are the cameras that I put out. The ones that have other names is from other individuals like FDOT or FSTOP Foundation, or maybe Big Cypress. So I'm just we won't have time to watch the whole thing, but you are definitely welcome to watch it. But I'm gonna just click on a couple of the good ones. So here's a female with a kitten, big kitten. I like the way they're walking through the mud, like it annoys them. It's a gator. Some more bears. And then I love this one. I just like the way it sounds walking through the water, the way his feet are splashing. Deer. And this is one of the ones on Alligator Alley. You can see how big and open it is. That's why deer are much more likely to use those. Let's see if there was female and her kittens talking to each other. And if you go to YouTube and go to FDOT's page, they have this video as well as a handful of other ones where they have put together a bunch of footage from their crossings, so you can watch the whole thing. Trying to go to the next slide. Go. There we go. So I mentioned this one a couple slides ago, this place where they retrofitted and basically created a crossing for much, much less of a cost than it would to build one from scratch. And I've had cameras out there since they finished construction and have consistently got a few different panthers using it. Here's one in the middle of the day. You can hear the cars going overhead. And these ledges they built are basically just like stacked concrete bags. So I've gotten a number of other different species going through under there, even a cow, which obviously got off one of the neighboring ranches. But so seeing such a large animal go through is a kind of a nice, then you kind of think maybe a deer will use it eventually. Here's a picture that Carlton Ward got of a male walking underneath one of those alligator alley bridges in the middle of the day. So we know that they work. And if you want to see any of the other pictures, you can go to this link for FDOT has this web map that basically any of these green dots are any of the places that either I've put a camera during my study or the FDOT has put cameras or any of their other partners that they partner with that have put cameras. And all of the pictures, so not just even the panther ones, but all of the pictures that had animals in it from those locations, you can flip through them. One of the other reasons why this is really important, look at my time. Oh, I better start going fast. I'm getting close. Some of you might be familiar already with the 1,000 Friends of Florida analysis that they do. They did one for 2060, and then they just updated it to the 2070. So basically, what it looked like in Florida in 2010, with the developed areas being red, protected in the dark green, and then other, which is primarily like private lands, like ranches in the light green. If we keep developing at the rate that we are now without making any changes, not thinking about any of these kinds of things, this is potentially what it's going to look like in Florida in 2070. All that red that we've basically completely cut off this area along I-4. I mean, everything, you've really gotten into this area in the middle here. I live in Lake Placid, so I don't want this much red in here. But if we change what we're doing and we think about things like wildlife corridors, wildlife crossings, protecting areas, putting private lands into conservation easements. It's not about buying private lands and putting them into state or federal conservation. We want them to stay in the ownership of the private landowners, but protect as much of it as possible with things like conservation easements. If we do that sort of thing, potentially could look like this. And there's still a lot of red, but there's a lot less red, and there's a lot more places where the green connects to each other. So we have a little bit more of a connection across here. So this is what it could be like if we keep all of those sorts of things in mind going forward. Because here's just a couple of examples of why this is, I'm sure y'all already know, but a couple of actual live examples of why this is so important. So in April of 2014, we responded to a call outside of Fort Meade of a panther that had been hit by a car but was alive. And myself, FWC, LE, sheriff's employees, and then this is our panther vet from Gainesville. There's also now a panther vet in Naples, but at the time we just had Dr. Cunningham in Gainesville, who drove all the way down from Gainesville to Fort Meade that night. But obviously we were able to rescue this male panther. He had a broken femur. He went to the vet school in Gainesville and had it repaired, and then went up to White Oak Conservation outside of Gainesville, where all of the panthers that FWC is able to rescue that can be released, they are rehabbed in that at that location. And then in January of 2015, he was released onto Kissimmee Prairie State Park, which was basically kind of the closest area we could get to release him without sticking him right back in Fort Meade around all those roads, but north of the river, because he'd already made that journey. He was born down south, but he had traveled up north. So there wasn't any reason to release him back down there. He needed to be released up here where he'd already traveled to. And he ran off and swam the Kissimmee River that night and started heading west, basically heading straight back to Fort Meade area. And what's crazy though, so these are the locations from his collar from when he was released in January of 2015 up until about October of 2015. So the collars are supposed to last longer than that, but technology, you know how it is. It died earlier than it should have. But he traveled all the way back towards where he was hit, spent a bunch of time, multiple times over here. This is Mosaic Reclamation Land area. And they were absolutely fantastic. Let me go out and track him multiple times and put cameras. He went up and crossed to 27 multiple times, traveled down the turnpike basically, ended up over here across 60, where I'm pretty sure he used one of those wildlife crossings. He went up 95, crossing back and forth multiple times, which is under construction over here, so it's terrible. Spent a bunch of time on Sebastian River State Park, which they were actually fantastic as well. We went out and checked on him one day there and actually saw him run across the trail in front of us. Went all the way up to Palm Bay and did the whole thing multiple times. He almost went coast to coast. His entire area that he covered was about 800 miles. And after his collar stopped working, a hunter got pictures of him way down off the screen down in Martin County at Allapattah Flats. And we knew it was him because he still had his collar on and his ear tags. And that was in November of 2015. And then in December of 2015, a landowner got him on their ranch somewhere in about middle Okeechobee County that also submitted it. So he also did this whole thing plus down here. And since then, his collar did eventually drop and we recovered it. And we don't have any idea what happened to him after that. He does still have ear tags. I think if we ever got a picture of him, we'd know, but we don't really know for sure what happened to him after that. But just a really good example of why it's important to think about wildlife corridors, landscape scale conservation, because they're just covering these huge areas. Basically the same example, but with a black bear. And this was the bear that actually was the inspiration for the Florida Wildlife Corridor Expedition films. If you've seen those, if you haven't, I highly recommend them. This bear that Joe Guthrie collared as part of his master's work, he collared it in Sebring, and that bear basically went up across the bombing range, eventually ended up towards Disney Preserve. This right here, these two little bumps right here, is him trying to get across I-4, but couldn't. Came all the way back down, traveled all the way down along the Kissimmee, ended up all the way over to Babcock before it came back over and his collar dropped at a scheduled time. So I don't remember the total miles on this one, but also just another really great example of why it's so important to think about things like wildlife corridors and wildlife crossings. And then I'm on like my second to last slide, so hopefully no one's timing me and thinking I'm going too long. So just to add in another kind of challenge to these animals that so far have, we've been helping them. Obviously, we did genetic restoration. We're trying to protect lands and create corridors and crossings, and they have started to recolonize their previous range by getting north of the river, having breeding north of the river. But then this new thing has popped up, and it was named. It didn't have a name before. They still don't know exactly what it is. But because of the area in the brain that it affects, it's been called feline leukomyelopathy, or FLM, because it affects so leuco is white. So it's basically affecting the myelinated axons in the white matter of the brain. So it's a neurological disorder. And they first detected it with some game cameras in October of 2019 in Collier County. But since then, it's been in a couple other counties. It's been seen in panthers and bobcats. So it's just affecting cats that we know of, but it's obviously not genetic because it's affecting both panthers and bobcats. Since then, so as of March of this year, they know of 11 confirmed cases, mostly bobcats, but 3 panthers. This first one actually up here, October one, was a female with kittens. They were able to trap all 3. I think it was 2 kittens and 1 female. And she unfortunately didn't make it. They had to euthanize her because it was too severe, but the kittens were not affected and actually were released, I believe. I'll play this really short clip you can see. So it affects basically their use of their back legs. And some of them are worse than others. So it's only 25 seconds long. So I think that's it. So some of them are very severe to where they're basically dragging their legs and obviously can't survive. Some are a little bit more manageable like this one, but they still don't know what it is. And they have done a ton of research. They've talked to researchers across the globe, and they have started testing toxins. They've ruled some of them out. They've ruled out some other diseases, but we still don't know exactly what it is. But FWC is continuing to monitor it along with other agencies with game cameras, working with other private individuals and groups that also monitor with cameras. So, and they're continuing to collect anytime they are able to collect either a roadkill or individual that they know is affected. They're able to obviously necropsy that carcass to try to figure out what it is. So hopefully at some point they'll be able to pinpoint what's going on. And like I said, even though it's occurred in multiple counties, one of the bobcats was as far as Hillsborough, it has at least stayed kind of low in numbers so far. I mean, 3 panthers so far that they know of. I'd like to change off of these ones with the YouTube. Whew, okay. So I just threw this in here to end with a couple of videos because they're a lot of fun. This is one of my wireless cameras that I have down in southern Hendry County that I originally put up because the female in that area I knew was nursing, and I really wanted to get video of her kittens. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like she managed to keep that litter, but this is the male hanging out in the same area. So I'm fingers crossed going to see kittens at some point here pretty soon. But I put the camera on this log because, and I hate to make this, again, it's kind of anthropomorphizing, but we really sometimes just think of them as like a big house cat, right? And what does your house cat like to do? I know my cats love their scratching post. Panthers do too. And he comes by multiple times. The female, I didn't put the video in, but the female, she's so funny. Sometimes she'll come over to scratch it and the log will move and it'll kind of startle her and she'll jump back. But I have lots of videos of them scratching the log. I also have everything likes to stand or sit or walk across that log. So I have owls standing on it, rats. The turkeys walked by a few months ago with all their poults, and every single poult jumped over the log. So it's a lot of fun, as well as collecting really great data. It's also just a lot of fun to have all these game cameras. And then I always like to kind of end on this one. So this is the very first female from Babcock that we don't even know if she's still there. That was her second litter that we have no idea what happened to them, but it's the reason why I do what I do. I really want to help to see this species recover. And the fact that the females getting across the Coexisting River again happened during my time that I was here in Florida makes me feel very, I'm glad I got to be a part of it, or just to see it, that it happened. And that's her as well. A really wonderful photo that Carlton Ward got of her at Babcock Ranch, not that long after we had found her and started really monitoring out there and seeing what she was doing. But all the other partners that work with us, there's more, I'm sure, that I don't list, but I'm really just excited that you let me come on again and talk. If you want to see other places where Panthers are, you can go to the Panther Sightings website with FWC. I also recommend that you like Path of the Panther on Facebook and Instagram. That's something that Carlton and some others have put together to basically tell this story of Panthers trying to travel across Florida. He does it with really fancy camera setups. I do it with game cameras, but either way, we're collecting data, which is really important. So you can donate to that if you wish. You can also just follow the page and see updates. Eventually, there'll be a film. We've done some of the filming. They're continuing to do more, and hopefully sometime next year there'll be a film coming out as well. So I can take questions now if people have questions.
Thank you so much. That was an excellent talk. Okay, questions. Can you see them?
Well, I think I'm on the wrong thing. Let me.
There are some that are just comments. And then Lauren was asking where to see the
I think I have to stop sharing
the videos, and you've already told us you just put in FDOT into the YouTube.
Go to YouTube and just search for FDOT.
Okay.
It won't let me get my mouse off of the. There we go. It wouldn't let me get the mouse off that screen, so I could click on the comments. There we go. Okay.
And let's see.
So that you can go to YouTube and type in FDOT, and that's where a bunch of those wildlife crossing videos are at. And then you can also go to, and their Facebook page has them too, I think. You can also go to, if you type in FDOT GIS, I don't remember the exact website, but if you were to type that in, it would probably come up as well. And that brings up that map where you can click on the different bridges and see what pictures there were.
Okay. And here's another one.
So it's been such a long period of time now since the genetic introgression. It can be tough to kind of tease out how much came from Texas and how much. So they're still all Florida Panthers, even if they have those Texas genes, because when they used to range across the entire Southeast, they would have bred with cats in Texas, cats in the Midwest, cats in the Northeast. And that's a normal exchange of genetic material. It wasn't until they got stuck in South Florida because of humans, we cut them off, that we had to artificially basically restore that gene flow by bringing in those females from Texas. So they did a bunch of genetic research shortly after all that happened and mapped it all out. And I don't know the numbers off the top of my head. There's a really great paper though, and it's actually written really well. It doesn't read like a really hard science paper, I promise. That if you look up, it came out in the journal Science, and the lead author's last name was Johnson. So if you look that up, it has a really great breakdown of what they found in the genetics, as well as the pedigree. What their current numbers are, I don't know. I don't know when the last time they ran genetic information, since it's been so long. I suspect if you really looked hard enough, you might be able to find some of those Texas genes, but it's not going to be a large amount since it's been so long.
Okay, here's another one.
So the Panther sightings, you can actually go to the Panther sightings website. It's on FWC. If you just type in FWC Panther sightings, it brings up an interactive map that you'll see all those same little dots that I had. And you can actually click on the dots and it'll show you the picture that the person submitted with it. And it only shows verified sightings. So the picture will come up and it'll be a panther or a track or something. You won't see all of the other non-verified ones that get submitted, because people sometimes submit pictures of house cats or bobcats, or we've seen it all. Things that aren't panthers aren't on the map. So you can go and see all of those.
I wanted to ask, how much less do the shelves cost than the overpasses?
That would be a question for one of the guys at FDOT, but I know it's substantial. I mean, it's a lot. So like I said, building one of those span type bridges from scratch, he told me once, was at least $4 million. And I don't even know if it's $1 million to do one of those, retrofit. But also the kind of trick sometimes is when there's art, and this is how they're getting them into some of the places on I-4, is when there's already some kind of construction happening. Like they're doing work on one of those interchanges right now, and I forget which number it is, but not that far from Lakeland. Because there's already a project going on, having a wildlife crossing being put in as part of that existing project also helps to get them approved and done, rather than just like standalone, I'm going to go build this $8 million crossing right here in the middle of nowhere. Not that that's not still important, but it's harder to make it happen. Mm-hmm.
So that's why her cameras and her research focuses on which are the best places.
Yeah, and there's a short, so the Florida Wildlife Corridor Expedition, they're one of their shorter ones that they did a few years ago, where they basically went from Disney Wilderness Preserve to Green Swamp. They went under a bridge on I-4. And so if you watch that video, it's called The Last Green Thread. I get to make a short appearance where we're underneath that bridge. And it's right where 3 different roadkills had happened in the past of panthers. And it's just a bridge, and there's a bunch of rocks and stuff underneath. But when you're underneath there, and when I put cameras up and we're checking them at the time, I mean, you could see that very easily it could be a wildlife crossing if they added fencing and just maybe made it a little easier to walk besides the giant rocks. So there's a lot of opportunity, and FDOT has been very proactive about making that happen. Did I miss any questions?
I think we're getting to the thank yous, and we really appreciate it. Yeah, everybody, you saw her email, and if you want to donate to help her research, you can do it through the Path of the Panther. Just make sure you add a note that's specifically for Jen.
But yeah, follow their page, Path of the Panther pages, and email me if you have any additional questions. I'm always available, and hope that you enjoyed it. So odd not to interact and know how many are out there. But.
Well, we have about 44 or so that were on YouTube, so we got a good, and many more will watch it as we post it later. So thank you so much again.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you.
All right. Good night, everybody. We're ending the broadcast.